Good day, everyone! Most people who play Final Fantasy XIV understand that it isn't the first MMO in the history of the franchise. It has a senior, called Final Fantasy XI, a game that is remembered fondly by many who played it, myself included, as it was the first MMO I ever had the pleasure of experiencing when I was a kid. Even when I was younger, the idea of a massive world to explore with friends and other people amazed me. And I'm happy to say that sense of wonder hasn't faded, as MMOs hold a very special place in my heart to this day. But while I may remember my time and adventures in 11 with loving nostalgia, I'm well aware that many players within 14 have never touched it. However, with Dawntrail's new Alliance raid, Echoes of Vana'diel, right around the corner, I feel now is as good a time as any to discuss one of Final Fantasy XI's most important and tragic tales. Gather around, my friends, as we discuss a story from years past, the tale of the Shadow Lord, and ponder what his appearance within Final Fantasy XIV might mean for the star. The Shadow Lord is known for being the first real antagonist of Final Fantasy XI, the first villain that must be stopped in order for the world to know any form of peace in the future, the first worldly challenge that you would eventually have to overcome as an adventurer. But who is the Shadow Lord, and what made him so dangerous? That is where our story truly begins. Our journey takes us to one of Vana'diel's most respected nations, the Republic of Bastok. Bastok was a city-state created and maintained mostly by a race called the Hume, humanoids known for their versatility and ingenuity. In fact, it was the Hume's technological progress that catapulted Bastok into the future and cemented its place as a powerful nation. Many crafters and engineers could be found here at any point, including a familiar inventor named Cid. However, it wasn't just the Hume that would be known to live within Bastok, as they would eventually be joined by a much larger race called the Galka. The Galka had unfortunately lost their homeland to an invading race of bug-like beastmen called the Antika, and thus needed a new home. Eventually, Bastok would welcome them within their lands. Thus, with the Hume's intellect and the Galka's brawn combined, the strength behind the Republic of Bastok was now unquestionable. Among some of Bastok's most respectable positions were a group of elite guards called the Mithril Musketeers. These men and women were hand-picked specialists that answered directly to the president of Bastok. Only about 5 Mithril Musketeers existed at a time, and any problem they are told to address is considered one of national importance, and thus must be handled as efficiently as possible. And 3 of these musketeers are about to be given a very important assignment. These musketeers were a warrior named Ulrich, a swordsman named Raugrim, and a monk named Cornelia. They were tasked to work alongside 2 of Bastok's allied nations, the Kingdom of Sandoria and the Federation of Windurst, to investigate a place called Fei Yin. And the reason all nations were interested in this location was because they were the ruins of a once lost city that used to be inhabited by a strange race of people called the Zillart. So, instead of fighting each other over what remains here, they decided that each of them would send chosen envoys to help with the investigation. Our 3 musketeers would be joined by a Taru white mage named Iru Kiru, as well as a Mithra ranger named Yao Ramta. But Sandoria would only send 1 Elvon knight named Frank Maj. But with all 6 party members brought together, their crew was dubbed the Multinational Expedition, and our party would venture into the hazardous lands of Fei Yin. While cooperation was their written goal, most members of this party had their own reasons for joining the expedition. Irukiru was hoping to forward his own historical research. Frank Maj was only interested in Sandoria's continued prosperity, and Ulrich was hoping to prove himself to his nation, as well as to someone he loved. Because unfortunately, Ulrich was driven by the envy of his fellow musketeer, Raugrim. The reason being was because Raugrim was not only considered to be Bastok's greatest swordsman at the time, but he was also a tailkeeper. To the Galka, a tailkeeper is considered to be one of, if not the greatest honors to have in their culture. As a people, the Galka not only believed in reincarnation, but could observe it. While most Galka could never remember their past lives upon birth, a tailkeeper could. Tailkeepers were able to remember who they were, what they did, and what the Galka stood for during those time periods. As such, tailkeepers were often revered as kings of their people due to their ability to know and understand things that one mortal life could never comprehend. However, remembering the skills and joys of one's past life also means remembering the sorrow and hatred their people may have felt during those times too. As such, many tailkeepers become very depressed or even go mad with the weight of so many memories. But Raugrim himself was resolved to remain as understanding and compassionate as a leader should be. As our party traveled to the ruins of Feyin, they found that this land wasn't as barren as they had hoped. Demonic monsters, strange constructs, and various magical phenomena made traveling these lands extremely dangerous. In fact, they could barely investigate anything of value without being attacked or needing to flee. They determined that more than 6 people would be necessary to secure a place like this, ultimately doubling back to a snowy area called Sharkabard to decide what to do next. It was here that a split would happen. The 3 musketeers from Bastok would wander off while investigating the area, while the others would stay together. Raugrim, who was now alone with Ulrich, had lowered his guard as he began examining the local crevices in the area. He could hear his friend approaching and never felt like he was in any danger. That was until Ulrich drew his blade and attacked Raugrim without warning. Ulrich had landed a lethal blow, and Raugrim's life was quickly fading away as he lay on the ground in confusion and pain. The near-dead tailkeeper looked at the man he called a brother-in-arms with shock, asking the simplest of questions. Why? Ulrich shook his head and sighed with a face full of contempt. He answered the question by simply stating that he never liked Raugrim, and with that, brought up his blade one more time to deliver a finishing blow. But as he brought down his blade, another person had ran to try and prevent this madness. Cornelia, who had just arrived, leapt towards Raugrim, hoping to defend him, but instead took the full force of Ulrich's attack. For you see, while romantic relationships between the Galka and the Hume were seen as rather taboo, Raugrim and Cornelia couldn't help but admire and then love each other. Cornelia wasn't just trying to stop a fight, she was trying to protect the man she loved. Ulrich's eyes turned from a jealous rage to surprise and disgust. Because despite knowing that there was something between Raugrim and Cornelia, Ulrich had always wished that she had loved him instead. Having cut down the woman he adored, Ulrich's shock made him flee in a confused panic, leaving Raugrim and Cornelia both to perish together in the cold of Sharkabard. Still reeling from the acts of murder he committed, Ulrich rejoined the other 3 members of their party. telling a tale of how Raugrim and Cornelia had run into trouble around the deep crevices of Sharkabard. The others mobilized immediately to assist, but Ulrich led them in the wrong direction. Jarl Ramta, despite being a talented ranger, could find no evidence of their allies, and without finding them, Irukiru couldn't use his white magic to heal them. But then there was Frank Maj. He alone noticed just how strangely Ulrich was acting, and even questioned the Hume, asking if he was being honest. However, when Ulrich frantically insisted on the validity of his story, Frank Maj simply let it go, believing that he had seen everything he had needed to see from this expedition. And with that, all four of them decided to retreat back to safety and eventually return home to inform their leaders about their ill-fated adventure. That they found nothing of value within Fei Yin, nothing worth risking more lives over at the very least. While Ulrich fled the scene of the crime, Raugrim and Cornelia shared one final moment together. Raugrim watched as Cornelia, the woman he loved, perished in his arms, and soon he could feel the end would claim him as well. Sorrow and regret was all he could feel as darkness came for him. But instead of the end, a new sensation began to burn in his chest. But something was there. Just because they didn't find anything of interest within Fei Yin or Sharkabard doesn't mean that nothing was here. Dark energies of unimaginable power flowed beneath the earth here, and the arrival of such emotional beings had stirred these powers to awaken. Whether they had known it or not, all of them had fallen victim to this power on some level. But Raugrim was a talekeeper. He bore the thoughts and emotions of not just this life, but that of an entire life before, of his people, his culture, and their collective rage. As he held Cornelia's body, these dark powers stoked the fires of anger, hate, and vengeance inside of Raugrim. Such betrayal could not go unanswered. Such injustice must be punished. Not just Ulrich, but the entire party that abandoned him, the countries that had used them like tools, and the people in those countries who let it happen. All must pay in blood. As these twisted energies smothered the last of Raugrim's goodwill and compassion, a dark entity clad in shadows now stood where he had died. Gone was the talekeeper of the Galka and musketeer of Bastok. Now all that was left was the Shadow Lord, and he would see the people of this world punished for all their crimes.
I cannot die. Not until I have eradicated you and your kind from this world.
And that was only the beginning. Time would pass, and one by one, the Shadow Lord would seek vengeance on the party that abandoned him. Irukiru, who was more worried about his own research to care about much else, was found investigating the ruins of an ancient jungle. He thought he had to only worry about the local tomberries. That was until the Shadow Lord manifested before him, accusing the Tarutaru of betrayal. And without mercy, the Shadow Lord cut him down. Yao Ramta was faring even worse. She was locked in a cell after having brought a strange crystal called magicite back to her people from Fei Yin. Indeed, she had found something of interest and worth during the expedition, but instead of telling the party, she hoarded it for herself. Same as in Sharkabard, the strange energies of this magicite had brought out the worst in the hearts of all those who stood near it, causing violent conflicts to emerge between her people. So, for bringing what her leaders saw as a curse back to their home, she was locked away and awaiting execution on the grounds of treason. But as she sat in her cell, who would appear before her but the Shadow Lord? He began condemning her for all her failures before finally executing her himself. Her people would only find out her fate later. Then there was clever Frank Mage. Despite being the leader of the Mistal Knights and a respected member of society, he was restless. Lately, his dreams have been plagued by nightmares, as if something was terribly wrong, and he had no idea why. One night, the nightmares made him wake in a cold sweat, and instead of going back to sleep, he decided to walk the city's corridors to try and clear his mind. But it was within his meandering that he would walk upon the Shadow Lord. Same as before, the Shadow Lord accused Frank Mage of all crimes befitting the party. The Elvon stumbled back, insisting that it was all an accident, that he had no idea what had befell Raugrim and Cornelia. But deep in his heart, he knew that he was lying, not just to the Shadow Lord, but to himself, as he alone had seen through Ulrich's actions, and now he was paying the price for his indifference. And with that regret tormenting him, the Shadow Lord slew him where he stood. And finally, there was Ulrich. Ulrich was no longer in Sharkabard, which means the dark energies that fed upon his envy and pride were entirely gone. And all that he had left was the memory of the crimes he committed. He was now the undisputed leader of Bastoc's Mithril Musketeers, praised as being the greatest warrior their nation had, and honored as the sole survivor of their country's expedition. But all of these things were hollow titles. In the wake of his treachery, Ulrich fell into a deep depression that he would never recover from. Despite his respected position, he avoided people, choosing instead to live alone for most his life. It was in that self-imposed isolation that he would be visited by the Shadow Lord. Ulrich didn't even deny the sins of his actions, meeting his end at the demon's black blade. With those guilty of treachery now punished, the Shadow Lord turned his attention to the nations that sent them to Feyin in the first place. But to contend with capitals, he would need an army. Given his dark influence, the Shadow Lord easily rallied demons known as the Kindred to his side, becoming a force to be reckoned with. But he needed more. Many beast tribes across the world despised the city-states he planned to trample, and enlisted their aid as well. Those that did not immediately submit to his will would be beaten down until they did. Eventually, he was joined by the races of the Orcs, Yagudo, Gigas, and Kadav. And finally, the Shadow Lord had the power and numbers he needed to challenge entire continents. And so it was. The dark and vengeful campaign of the Shadow Lord had officially begun. His story, of course, does not end there, as he would cause what would eventually be called the Crystal War, attacking the nations of Bastock, Windurst, and Sandoria all at once with his massive army. And even after his assumed defeat, 20 years would pass, and rumors of the Shadow Lord's imminent return plagued the lands and emboldened all sorts of monsters. All this would eventually be experienced in the main story of Final Fantasy XI by your own characters. But to tell all of those tales with appropriate detail, I would need much more than this video alone. In fact, I feel I've paraphrased and condensed far more than I usually do, just to give you a complete idea of the Shadow Lord's character. So, I do apologize to any Final Fantasy XI veterans that feel I skipped over some details. I was definitely trying to not make this an hour-long video. But tell me, Now that you know who and what the Shadow Lord is, what role do you think he shall play in the universe of Final Fantasy XIV? As I stated earlier, the Shadow Lord was one of the biggest antagonists of 11's story, so his presence here could have far-reaching consequences, or none at all. Will the echoes of Vana'diel Raid simply be a giant reference to the 11 universe and keep these worlds separate? Or would you prefer it weave these stories into the fabric of Heidelin's history like with the Ivalice raids? I look forward to seeing your thoughts on the Shadow Lord and the raid's eventual story in 14 down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this retelling, let me know by sharing this with your friends and, of course, subscribing to the channel. That way I can gauge your interest and look for time to cover more Final Fantasy XI lore if you're interested. But, until then, I have been the Synodic Scribe, and until I see you in my own clears of the Vana'diel Raid, stay safe, my friends. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoy my content, it would mean the world to me if I had earned you as a subscriber. We are currently on the road to 50k, and I'd love to have you as part of that journey. I'd also like to take this time to thank my amazing Patreon supporters: Nanama, Amina Viltaria, Slippers, Oskan Hawk, Naria O'Meara, Potato, Seth Rosewood, and Sinalv Bagel. Your support has always meant so much to me and helps to keep the content flowing with ease. If you're interested, there are additional links down in the description to my Discord, X, and other things as well. But until I see you again, I hope you're having an amazing day. Class dismissed.